This is CXO Secrets, the podcast that takes you inside the mind of business leaders and reveals the strategies behind their success. Coming up in today's show,
all the transformations I've worked on in the past, there's always an element of business process automation, leveraging contemporary tools, right? That hasn't changed. What also hasn't changed is the need to understand the business problem you're solving and the use case before you think about the technology that's going to help you solve that problem. And I think whether it's AI or SaaS products, et cetera, that has not changed. What has changed is expectations I see from senior leaders as to how the organization can quickly leverage AI because they might be getting pressures from the board, et cetera, and how that solution is going to factor into the transformation. And there's just a lot of pressure, like how are we going to leverage AI, right, in this transformation?
the CXO Secrets podcast is powered by EDS, going beyond connections. Find out about upcoming C-level events, experiences, and insights at edsxevents.com. And joining us today is a digital transformation leader with 20 plus years of technology leadership experience with companies such as AIG, TIAA, and now COO and SVP for global technology at News Corp. Welcome, Mark Lopez. Hi, Mark.
Great to be here, David.
Thanks for joining us. And it's good to catch up with you again. We last spoke when I was hosting EDS event in New York. And that is where you're based, isn't it?
That is, yes.
Tell us a bit about your experience, because I mentioned a number of different roles that you've had taking you to this point. If you were to sum up your journey so far, how would you do that?
Sure. So as you mentioned, 20 plus years in technology leadership experience. The first half of my career was largely around consulting roles, driving large scale global ERP implementations for companies such as Accenture, et cetera. From there, as my family started to grow, I went to the client side. And for the last 10 years, have been driving global transformations for Fortune 100 companies, particularly digital transformations, automating business processes, leveraging contemporary technologies, large-scale application modernization initiatives, et cetera.
So that term digital transformation, you and I both know, it pops up in these conversations with some regularity there. And I think there's a couple of angles I'd like to explore on that with you, if that's okay today. And maybe the first one of those is around culture, around people, because as we say, a digital transformation, it is not a technology project, even though some would have us believe that it is. It's about the processes. It's about a business process transformation, which is underpinned by digital. But unless you update the processes and bring the people along with you, they're doomed to fail. So in terms of culture, and I know this is an area that you've got a keen interest in, why is culture so important when executing successful digital transformation projects? Spell it out for us.
Well, I think the two key areas of culture, which are extremely important, are really around willingness to change. And that's through all levels of the organization, and building trust, starting from the executive leadership team, right? So in many cases, this business process automation, just as an example, often involves job change for people. And that could be scary, right? Could even mean job loss. So, how do you get, the entire organization understanding those changes could be occurring, comfortable with being part of that transformation? And a lot of that is really incumbent upon leadership who's driving the transformation to explain the whys behind that transformation, why there's a business imperative, and what it could mean to those employees in a very candid way. Otherwise, you may get very passive and active resistance to that change, to that transformation.
I like my sports. I support a Premier League football team very close to where I live, and managers, they come and go, particularly in soccer. And it's astonishing to see sometimes how a group of players under the leadership of one manager go from Premier League topping, winning cups and trophies, and generally seeing as though they are one coherent team, to underneath another manager really losing a lot of that cohesion, seeming as though they aren't as convincing and all pulling in the same direction on pitch. And I think for me, that really points to the pivotal role that a leader in the technology space, in the business space, plays as well. Do you agree? Do you find that there are some sports analogies? I know you're no stranger to sport yourself. Do you find that some of those analogies transfer well to the business space and sport?
Absolutely. Well, I'm a New York Jets fan, right? So I think the importance of leadership is key, particularly this season, as an analogy. So I would agree with you, David, but I also feel like that leadership has a responsibility for building great leaders underneath them, right? Yeah. That is, I think, a key function, particularly during this, a large transformation. And a lot of that goes to making sure that your leadership team has the been there, done that capabilities, right? In many cases, a lot of this transformation work should have happened in the past, but hasn't, right? For various reasons. So having that, mid-level set of managers behind the transformation and willingness to change is key. And identifying any resistance there up front is of particular importance. And then also creating the culture in which if there is concern regarding the transformation, whether it's a specific business risk that could be occurring because of it, and having the ability for those leaders to speak up on those concerns is also equally important, because some of those concerns could be very legitimate and need to be addressed.
So maybe this is taking a bit of a step back. Do you have a definition for what culture is? And you mentioned it there in conversation. How do you put your finger on what culture is? And when we're trying to create a culture, to nurture a culture, does that definition help us to understand the specific levers that maybe we need to pull or push on to shape it?
Yeah, I really believe culture is beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors, right, at its core. When I think corporate culture, I really believe it's those three core elements. Right. And that behaviors is really not just what work has to get done, but how the work gets done. Mm-hmm. Right. Are we being collaborative? Are we working as a team? Right. Are we listening? Right. Are we building that trust? Right. So it's not just about the what of the work and the why of the work. It's the how it gets done.
And there are different styles of leadership on that plane as well, aren't there? There's very prescriptive management. Some might call it micromanagement. And then there is empowerful management, where you are not necessarily saying how it gets done, but you are putting a sense of trust. You are giving your workforce agency and trust, I think, is the right word, that they can get the job done to the best of their ability without peering over their shoulder every 5 minutes and checking in.
I would agree. And I think when it comes to setting the strategy of a transformation, it really starts with the strategy, the vision, and the outcomes, right? Particularly outcomes being specific best business benefit, whether that's achieving greater market share, driving greater revenue, driving efficiencies via cost savings initiatives. And if you're clear about those outcomes, it allows different levers to be pulled to achieve that, and gives that level of flexibility to the management team on how to achieve those outcomes versus being terribly prescriptive. And I think all leaders want that level of flexibility, particularly if they know their business very well. Yeah. They can pull a lever to get that business benefit with minimal impact, but providing that optionality and just really targeting to what the outcomes are is, tends to yield benefits as from an approach standpoint, from my experience.
Yeah. Understanding those outcomes and back to the why are people going on this journey? That can certainly help from a personnel point of view. Now, you've been engaged in transformation projects for a while. Transformation projects have changed. And when I was working in the industry, we were getting ready for the year 2000. And boy, there was a transformation away from lots of legacy technologies back in those days. And whether it's e-business and e-commerce or moving to cloud and wherever we're moving to right now, that transformation has changed. There are cycles of it. And the current cycle that we're on right now, perhaps, is around AI and automation technologies, and they are increasingly becoming part and parcel of today's transformation projects. And I just wonder if that And if it does, how it changes our approach to managing people and process through this transformation, because particularly when we are talking about AI and automation, that's not moving from a system whereby you're editing a spreadsheet to using a SaaS service instead that's hosted in the cloud. These are some fundamental changes about not only how people do their work, but whether they're going to be able to carry on doing that work and might have to transform themselves in order to progress with the company.
Agreed, David. And I would say, to your point, certain elements of transformation have stayed the same. And with the advent of AI, certain elements are different, right? So from what similar perspective, from all the transformations I've worked on in the past, there's always an element of business process automation, leveraging contemporary tools, right? That hasn't changed. What also hasn't changed is the need to understand the business problem you're solving and the use case before you think about the technology that's going to help you solve that problem. And I think whether it's AI or a SaaS product, et cetera, that has not changed. What has changed is expectations I see from senior leaders as to how the organization can quickly leverage AI, because they might be getting pressures from the board, et cetera, and how that solution is going to factor into the transformation. And there's just a lot of pressure, like how are we going to leverage AI, right, in this transformation? So I think a lot of what's needed amongst transformation leaders is really around expectation settings regarding how AI will be leveraged, which includes ensuring that A, we have the right use case, but B, that given this technology is very new, that we're going to allow time to experiment, time to fail fast, right? And iterate until we understand how AI can best suit the business need. And business benefit may not be coming day one, right? Nor in a creative business case. So I think what's really key that I've seen as a difference is really that stakeholder expectation setting and that education.
I think how projects are managed has also changed in the last 20 years as well, from a very kind of top-down, rigid waterfall type structure to the more agile practices that we embark upon right now, and particularly when we are embarking on AI projects within organizations. We don't always know how they're going to turn out. We know that they're a journey that we're going on, but because the rate of innovation, because things are changing so quickly, it might be that the point at which you start a project, your end point is somewhere that might be different to where you ended up. I guess what you might say, though, Mark, is that as long as you understand what the business outcome that you want to drive towards, so long as you are still answering that, then it doesn't necessarily matter what path you take.
I would agree with that. And I think, and that question can be revisited right as you iterate.
Yeah.
I think, the other point, David, in terms of leveraging more of an agile iterative approach is there tends to be just a lack of patience amongst executive stakeholders to actually derive benefit from these transformations, right? No executive these days is going to wait 2 years to begin, obtaining business value from a large scale transformation, particularly if they're allocating capital to that program. So ensuring that there is a roadmap on which some short-term benefit through those iterations can be achieved is very key to maintain that transformation momentum.
And I guess the landscape within which many organizations operate now is one where it wasn't quite so easily the case 10 or so years ago now, but competitors, challengers can spin up some virtual systems, can spin up a cloud service, and can have a very big presence very, very quickly in a way that just wasn't possible pre-cloud, pre-virtualization. And I guess that's one of the contributors to this imperative to see progress quickly, even when you are a big oil tanker, traditionally seen as type of organization. So I appreciate that when you're in your position as that transformation leader, you've got the pressure from the top, from the executive board saying, we need to move quicker. I can see competitors and challenges over our shoulder. But then you've also got the organization who's trying to implement that change and to go on that journey, finding it difficult because these projects aren't easy. So how do you manage being in that squeezed middle? Is it a case, like you say, of finding those tangible wins to try and keep both up and downstream stakeholders happy? Are there any other tactics as well that can just help senior leadership understand why things maybe aren't moving as quickly as they might ideally like?
Well, I think, there's a couple elements to that, David. So one, yeah, to some extent, the transformation leaders are in the middle a bit. But I think having the iterative wins is key, not just for executive leadership, but for the team that's supporting the transformation, right? Because they take pride in those wins. But what I also think is important is really prototyping and actually demonstrating what AI can do from a toolset perspective to senior execs, right? So long gone are the days of reviewing PowerPoints, right, of potential business benefit. Now what we've been doing is actually bringing in partners, right, or our own development teams to the senior leadership team and actually demoing product,
Wow.
right, to allow them to see it come to life. And what's amazing about that is they have their own ideas. And I think it tends to get the leadership excited because it's more tangible, right, versus, hey, we're going to deliver a product 6 months from now and we'll let you know before we release it. Now it's how do you get that leadership part of that product design and product development process to get their fingerprints on it. And what I found is that has also, built a lot of executive buy-in and a lot of patience.
I really like that. And one of the themes that I've picked up on, I guess, and experienced myself over the last few years is this shrinking of the front office and the back office, this distance between the two. Obviously, we've seen some functions, DevOps, for example, SecDevOps and all that stuff kind of come together. It's this bridging of the gaps. So when you mentioned there, you've got developers going into a boardroom and showing prototype versions of the system and then having the senior leadership give instant feedback. That's something which I can imagine in some organizations, maybe still, but certainly a while ago, that would never, ever have happened. But actually, as you describe it there, to ensure that, I guess, at the sharp end, the delivery end, as well as the leadership end, both of them feel in touch with one another and have a sense of input, agency, control, whatever it is, that can keep both sides happy and both sides feeling as though they are, to an extent, steering the ship.
Agreed. And I would say there's another group that you want to make sure you're keeping happy, or another couple groups, legal and compliance.
Yes.
Right. And I think what's really key about some of the solutioning is how are you managing risk, right? How are you managing data privacy and making sure that is factored in? Like the fact of the matter is a lot of these tools, particularly third party, there's sometimes black box regarding how they operate and how data is stored, et cetera. So really understanding, how the tools work, how your data is going to be leveraged even in a prototype, and making sure, all those boxes are checked from a compliance and risk management standpoint, cyber standpoint, is very important, right? Because you don't want to launch a product, but then have reputational issues, right? If there's a data breach, et cetera.
There's only one direction in which that conversation is heading with regards to compliance and information security. You're absolutely right, and that does need to be factored in right at the beginning of all of these journeys, even more so given what we're using data for. We've mentioned AI and automation. What are the key things that you've seen, Mark? Key things you would suggest people should look out for? The early signs, perhaps, that suggest that, well, maybe not everything is going well in a transformation project. It's all very well and good if you've been there at the beginning of the transformation project, but let's say that you are brought in midway through a transformation project and you are doing a bit of a survey of the landscape. What sort of things should you be looking out for?
I would say the first would be senior leadership alignment on a clear strategy, vision, and set of outcomes. Right? I would say first and foremost, leadership needs to be aligned on the priority of the digital transformation, right? Not just from a work capacity standpoint, but from a budget allocation standpoint. I think that is key. I'd probably say the second element is, and we touched upon this earlier, do you have the right been there, done that leadership to drive the transformation, or a third party partner that has done the work before that can help guide?
And what about in terms of coming back to the culture thing as well? And you mentioned ensuring that everyone is aligned at the leadership level. What about as far as the workforce, those who are, let's say it being on a transformation journey, whether they really want to be on that transformation journey or not? What kind of things would you look out for in the broader organization, maybe away from the leadership?
I would ask the question, is there a larger change management function and practice being applied for this transformation, right? I think at the end of the day, success can't be making everyone happy, right, with the transformation. That's very unlikely. However, is the organization formalizing the communication process and ensuring the level of transparency of the whys behind the transformation, what everyone's role is in that transformation, what's going to occur when, I think is key, because that goes back to that trust point, David, where you tend to get attrition during transformations isn't people necessarily not agreeing with the transformation. It's them not trusting the leadership as to what's going to happen, when, and how it's going to impact them. So even if the news isn't going to be great as it relates to employee impact, having that level of transparency and trust by upper management is really important. And I found that formalizing your change management plan with a very deliberate set of communications from senior leaders has been very helpful.
And just going back to the points that we were making right at the beginning of this conversation, understanding the why, what it is, what outcome is desirable from the senior leadership, even if individual members of the workforce maybe feel disenfranchised because of a personal position it puts them in. If they're on side with the business and they understand that the business needs to transform for whatever imperatives, at least they can understand it, even if they feel that they might not be put in the best position as a result of it.
Exactly. And if, the organization is being thoughtful, if there's opportunities to reskill or retool the workforce in advance of the transformation, that's the ideal scenario. And I think that should also be, working its way in partnership with HR teams as part of that transformation plan.
So just landing back on the culture point around transformation for a final time, if there were a blueprint for creating the best environment from which to embark upon a transformation, what would you say the two or three most important elements of that blueprint, and what could you do as a leader tasked with driving the transformation to create, nurture those key foundational elements?
I would say a clear case for change and the ability, right, throughout all levels of the organization to understand how they tie in, right, to making the company better, faster, more efficient.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed, Mark. But I'm not going to let you go yet, because we have some questions at the end of CXO Secrets that we ask all of our guests. And the first one is, well, the clue's in the name of the show, really. What is your secret? I can tell you're a very modest man, but if you could put that to the side for one moment, what would you say, or maybe what would others say about you is your key attribute or a key experience or learning that you've picked up that has helped steer you towards where you are today and the philosophy you have now?
Well, I would say, David, I've had the benefit of working with some very great leaders who have taught me the value of building strong relationships and trust, which allows the level of influencing necessary, right, for a digital transformation. So I've been very fortunate that way. And I think in addition to that, I've worked with great teams underneath me where we have a culture such that if they disagree on direction or have a better idea, they feel comfortable raising their hand and voicing that, right? Which has definitely yielded better outcomes that I ever could have gotten on my own, right? So just having worked with great teams that I feel very fortunate for.
And transparency, creating that environment, creating that culture in which people do feel free to disagree agreeably is a popular phrase at the moment, so that everyone knows where they're at. And only then can you move forward and knock down the barriers at the right point rather than later on when it might be too late. Thank you. I like that. I like that. Now, something else we do here on CXO Secrets is a pass the question, where each guest gets to ask a question to the guest in the next episode, even though we don't know who they'll be. So, Mark, The question that Vineet Jaiswal, Chief Information and Digital Officer from ET Fuels, posed to you in the last episode was this.
Will a retired you will still like to see yourself what you have done in first half of your career? So if you divide the entire career into two parts, are you happy with what you have done in the first part of your career when you retire? So at the age of 60, let's assume you started at 20. So at 40, whatever you were doing, did you do everything right during that 40? Because after 40, people generally know what they're trying to do. So first half of their career, what they could have improved.
So one more time, do you think that a retired you would be happy with what you've achieved in the first half of your career? Mark?
I think a retired me would ask me the question, why couldn't you retire sooner? Because I would much rather be playing tennis right now than still working. All jokes aside, I think a retired me would be satisfied with the first half of my career. I think largely, not necessarily because of what I've been able to accomplish, but I look around me with all the relationships I've built and the teams I've worked with and what they've been able to accomplish. I'm quite proud of that. So I think the short answer to that would be yes. To be satisfied with where Mark has gotten so far.
And just picking up again, we've spoken about team trust culture. Another word that you've used a couple of times there is the relationships that you form as well with your teams, and they're important again for that transparency thing. Super. One more question. If you were to pose a question to our next episode's guest, whoever that may be, and there may be a CIO, a CISO, a CDO, or a leader of another flavor, if you were to pose a question to them, then what would that question be?
That question would be, if a young person approached him or her and demonstrated interest in following the same career path as them, what would their one piece of advice be?
I like that very much indeed. We'll leave it there for now. Mark Lopez, thank you very much indeed for joining us on CXO Secrets.
Thank you, David. Great to be here.